My name is Emily Sharp, and I'm the founder of Guiding Generations, which is a service that supports adult children living abroad as they embark on their caregiving journey with their aging parents.
It's a challenge. How do you look after your parents when you move abroad? Is the guilt, the responsibility? Maybe you don't have siblings. Maybe you do have siblings, and there's a responsibility for them as well. From your experience, when people are considering moving abroad, what would you say were the biggest worries that they have with regards to leaving elderly parents behind?
Sure. And I should say at the start that I've lived this experience myself. So I moved to the UK thinking I'd only be here for 1 or 2 years. And 8 years later, I am here for the foreseeable future with a husband and a son and a career. And for many people, for many expats, the caregiving journey creeps up on them. They may leave initially for a year or two, end up staying. And so when they leave, they may not be thinking about their parents aging or any family considerations. But as they decide to stay, then there might be a health crisis with a parent, or they may simply start to realize my parents are getting older and it will be more difficult as I'm far away to think about how I can be a good caregiver, coordinate with them, coordinate with my siblings. So it's something that can often creep up on people. Um,
Was it something that you were conscious of before you moved?
to be honest, it wasn't, and I feel I feel a bit guilty about that now. But you don't know what you don't know. So it really came to me a few years ago as my husband and I were doing our own estate planning as we were getting married and having a child. And this is often the trigger for a lot of people. You start to do your own planning, and then it leads you to think, how are my parents doing? Are they set up? Do they have what they need in case there were a crisis, in case something happened? And for me, it came in the form of my kind of typical eldest daughter anxiety. If something were to happen to mom and dad and they ended up in hospital, God forbid, do I actually have a list of their medications? Do I know all their doctors' names? I know they have a power of attorney, but do I have a copy of it, et cetera? So these concerns started creeping up for me, and it led me to create my own framework for having a conversation with them and ensuring that we had at least the basics in place were a crisis to happen. And as I did that, I started thinking, how are other expats managing this? To your point, I can't be the only one who's experiencing this. There must be other resources out there. And to be honest with you, I didn't find what I was looking for. I didn't find what I would have wanted. And so that's why I founded Guiding Generations, because I thought that there should be a service, there should be much more supported information, particularly for expats who are living at a distance from their families. There are, depending on the reports that you read, there are between 5 and 9 million Americans alone living abroad. That's a huge number of people. So if you are an expat, you are one among millions and many, many millions of people who are in the same boat with you. You're not alone. This is not an isolated experience. And many of us do feel the guilt and the concerns that you alluded to.
Given that a lot of people move abroad and their parents are in a pretty healthy shape, when's a good time to start thinking about it? Is it ever too early to start worrying?
The guidance I typically give people is if you feel it's too early to plan, it's probably exactly the right time. When you plan early, that gives you and your parents and your siblings a lot more optionality. It reduces stress, and it helps. Obviously, we all think more clearly when we're not under pressure. Another favorite saying of mine is, "You can't always predict a crisis, but you can stop it from turning into chaos." So when we plan ahead, even when we think it's too early, maybe your parents are in their mid to late 60s, they're in good health, they're maybe on the brink of retirement, their finances are okay, they're enjoying life, they're excited for the retirement transition. This is a great time to start planning. And what's especially terrific about this time period in your parents' life, and again, every family is different, every set of parents are different. But assuming everything I just said, they're in good shape, they're healthy, they're enjoying life. This is a time when planning ahead means that the the concerns about mortality and frailty that can really prevent a lot of people from taking action, right? We bury our heads in the sand when we're afraid of death, of decline. When you do it earlier on, that fear is a bit more abstract. And so it's actually it's a much more clear-headed time to start those conversations. And there are a number of different ways to start the conversations with your parents. If you are planning to go abroad and you're in that time frame where your parents are in that period, or even if they're a little bit older, that's a great time to start the conversation. And in fact, what I love to tell expats is you're probably planning more than most people who are back home. Take an American example. You live in New York, your parents are in California. You may think that because you live in the same country, you have all the time in the world. But if you decide to move abroad, you may actually be getting ahead of the game, as it were. If you can say, look, mom and dad, I'm moving abroad. A lot of complexity is involved. I want to make sure that we're addressing this up front and we have a plan in place so that I can provide the support that's needed when I'm abroad.
And it's an interesting subject as well because I mean I know I have elderly parents. My dad is now housebound, and we're still to have the conversation about what happens when my dad passes. But it's also equally not equally likely, but it's also possible that my mum could pass first, and we don't have a plan for either scenario. And that's not for want of saying we should get one in place, but we know we should, but getting that conversation off the ground is something that we've been trying to do for 20 years, and it's just never come around. My other kind of like personal experience with this is a very good friend of mine moved abroad, and his mum was she had cancer and had gone through a lot of treatment, but was alive. And the expectation was that she would probably pass first. And it turned out his dad did. So he was living abroad. He had a plan for his mum, but he didn't have a plan for his dad. So suddenly it goes into chaos because suddenly his mum needs more care. She doesn't have the caregiver. So understanding that everybody has an expiry date, that everybody could expire at any given time, the answer to being healthy is, well, actually, you still don't know, right? Disaster can always strike. So what does having a plan actually mean? Like, what would you consider to be the bare bones essentials that you need to have, certainly before you leave, but just generally in this kind of scenario?
And Rob, you're absolutely right. I mean, any one of us, God forbid, could be walking down the street and be hit by a bus. This can happen to any of us at any time. So I think as soon as you reach adulthood, we should all have these things in place, but especially as we age. We look at statistics and we know that men usually predecease women. If you have a chronic health condition, it may make you more likely to decline more quickly. We can look at stats, but then, as you said, maybe one of your parents passes earlier than expected. And I think the scenario planning is so important. So we can maybe touch on that later because it's something that I've done in my family, and the scenario planning has been very, very useful. What if mom passes first? What if dad passes first? In terms of the bare bone essentials, you need what I call the big five. You need a power of attorney for legal and financial decisions, or in the UK, that would be a lasting power of attorney, LPA, for property and financial affairs. You need a healthcare proxy or advanced medical directive in the States. Here in the UK, it would be a lasting power of attorney for health and welfare. So you need a last will and testament, of course, because otherwise you go through a very lengthy and expensive probate process, which is only magnified by long distance and time zones if you're based here. You need consent to share medical information. So in the US, that would be HIPAA. In the UK, you usually would fill out a consent form from the local GP. And then finally, and this is really, really important, especially for crises, emergency contacts for your parents, key health information like medical conditions, their doctor's names, medications, and then anyone else around them who can be trusted people. So neighbors, care managers, and someone in your extended family. It could even be a religious figure in your parents' lives who's trusted, someone who can be a point of contact if you or your siblings aren't there.
When I left London to move to the South Coast in the UK, I was thinking, well, actually, how I'm a little bit further away from my parents. So I started to sense that guilt. I started to feel like, well, actually, hold on, I can't react as quickly. I can't be there immediately. So guilt kind of starts to get involved. So how would you say that the sense of responsibility or the guilt can affect someone's decision making about relocating? And what can people do to manage that, especially in the what if something happens and I'm not there to help?
Yeah, the guilt is real, and I'm not here to say that you shouldn't feel guilty or you should ignore it, because I think it's important to recognize it, to name it out loud and say, I'm feeling guilt, either because I have moved or I'm anticipating a relocation and I'm worried and I'm feeling guilty about it. That's okay. Say it out loud, recognize it. That's fine. Um, Also keep in mind that I think the two cardinal rules being physically close doesn't necessarily give you peace of mind. You could be living down the street from your parents and something could happen to them and you're not there because you're on a trip or you're at work or something else. And just because you're physically close doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a better caregiver or a better child, right? Um, Again, this day and age, you could be living in London and your parent could be in Newcastle, and that's still a distance, right? Just because you're in a different country doesn't mean that you are necessarily a worse child or a worse caregiver. Um, I think it's also really important to recognize that guilt can impact your decision making, and it's helpful to recognize when that comes up. It often happens without us even realizing it. It could materialize as financially overcommitting, paying for things for your parents or for siblings out of guilt because you're not there. It could be about emotionally overcommitting. So trying to support your parents emotionally where that may not be appropriate, or trying to get involved in family dynamics where that may not be appropriate. It could be about offering to bankroll family vacations or traveling more back home rather than occasionally as appropriate, perhaps having your family come and visit you. There's so many different ways that guilt can show up and manifest. And I think just first recognizing it and then helping yourself reframe what that guilt really means. Um, when you are a caregiver, I think when you frame it as I'm the one who left and I'm the one who's being a bad child or a bad sibling, if you can reframe that as this is my decision. I'm going to move abroad. And how can I think about setting all of us up for success in the best possible way? What steps can we take to have a plan in place and do this the right way?
And I think there's a couple of things there. So first of all, guilt's just a feeling, and if you actually view feelings as things that happen, just because it's perceived as a negative doesn't actually make it that. It means that actually, if we go back to the plan discussion, it actually encourages you to think more about the plan. So okay, so I feel guilty about being far away. What can I do? How can I help? And I think that also that it can't be overlooked that the concept of moving abroad in most cases is to pursue a better life. And pursuing a better life means better mental health. It means potentially more better earnings. So financially, actually have more to offer. It also means that if you're living in an awesome place, then like you say, actually getting the family members out to see you can improve their life too. So there is that kind of guilt of what if this happens, but as long as you have your plan in place and you recognize that guilt is a factor and you then adapt your plan to deal with the guilt and you keep talking about that, guilt actually becomes just a temporary feeling that is one day going to pass, because actually you're doing so many other things that offset that and actually make you far more responsible as a human being to your parents, as your caregiver, because you're suddenly more attentive than maybe you would have been if you were only, say, 30 miles away. It doesn't stop the disaster happening. It doesn't stop that you can't be in the house when something happens. But it actually does mean that you've already thought about the plan. Like you said earlier, you because you're moving abroad, you actually think about this more than if you say living 20 miles away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so important to think about what does it mean to be a caregiver? Because I think for so many of us, we have this stereotypical image of to be a caregiver means I need to be by the bedside 24 hours a day. That can be one way of being a caregiver. Many of us are caregivers and we don't even name it or acknowledge it because we don't recognize it as a caregiving function. You can be a caregiver by providing financially, by offering administrative support, like we're talking earlier about paying bills, organizing finances. You can arrange in home care like cleaners, gardeners, tradespeople. You can be an emotional support for a sibling because if they're the primary in-person caregiver, then being a support to them is caregiving in and of itself. You can FaceTime during your parents' doctor's appointments. You could even go and visit them once a year without your partner and children, perhaps, so you can really give them some quality time. There's so many ways to be a caregiver, and I think having a more expansive definition will help all of us be better caregivers and recognize the work that we are doing to support our families.
And you touched on siblings there. Now, my sister lives in the same town as my parents. It's about 10 minutes drive, maybe 15 minutes walk. And I'm acutely aware of her situation, especially with her family and her children, where she has her life to do. And I I actually check in with her and talk to her about my parents rather than talking to my parents, because actually my sister is someone that needs support. So it's not just about the elderly relatives. One of the things that I have thought about in terms of moving away is being judged by her.
Yeah.
And again, that's on me to take that on. But many people will have that shared feeling. So how real is that pressure? And what should people, or how could people process it? Because of course, it's not just siblings; it's also society, it's other relatives, it's friends of them that, oh my god, I can't believe he's moved away. So how should people process it?
Yeah, the pressure is very, very real. And it could be based on broad cultural expectations. In many Asian cultures, the expectation is no matter what happens, you're there for your parents and you move back home and you support them. Or it could be just within a particular family. There's that internal family culture that raises that expectation. Um, and I'm not here to say that those expectations shouldn't exist, that they're not important, because intergenerational care is can be a beautiful thing, and it's something to be applauded. But as I said, there are so many ways to be a caregiver. And I think if we can reframe what it means to be showing up for your family, even from abroad, that can help us think about how we may be perceiving judgment from others. And actually having open and honest conversations with people may alleviate some of their inclination to judge as well. I think the best ways to work through judgment are, number one, get clear with yourself about what role or roles you can play, that you have the capacity to play, whether it's, financial capacity, emotional time, etc. And then what do you want to do? What are your strengths? And then to get clear with others. So something that I work on with clients and that I encourage everyone to do is, if you do have siblings, for example, or extended family members who are closer to your parents, sit down and write out a caregiving document. And again, even if your parents are doing really well and there are no storms on the horizon, still sit down and do it and say, what's your, in case of emergency, something happens to mom or dad, you know, Jason, you live close by, so the plan is you go get mom or dad, you go to the hospital, you phone me, you text me. I have my phone on, picks up after two calls, whatever it is. Do we know where the power of attorney documents are, et cetera, right? So write out that plan. If you're in the thick of caregiving and you're working with a sibling, get really clear about who's doing what. I've worked with people before, for example, who use just a very simple checklist to do app. It doesn't have to have a lot of bells and whistles, where they write out all of the things that need to be done for their parents, and they divide it into what has to be done in person, what can be done remotely. For example, does dad need a new walker? I'm living abroad. I can still go on to pick your your website, Amazon or something else. I can order that and have it delivered to home. I don't need to be there in person to do that. So getting really clear about roles and responsibilities, I think, can help alleviate some of the judgment, because it takes it from this abstract emotion into the practical realities of caregiving.
I think there's also an element here that just because someone is closer doesn't necessarily mean that they're available at that given time. So we don't, if we could plan when disasters happen, then great, but we can't, right? So just recently I went abroad and it just coincided with my sister going abroad. We hadn't communicated, we hadn't talked about it, but ultimately our plans were set anyway, so we couldn't have shifted that. So if something had happened, both of us were actually a long way away from home. So my mum would then need to go, well, okay, so what do I need to do? Or my dad would need to go, okay, so what do I need to do? And actually, do I need to do it now? And I think that I wrote a LinkedIn post about sitting on your hands. And actually, one of the things to consider, yes, you've got a plan in place, but also you have to understand each person's responsibility in that as well, because it might be that you actually have to do something about one of those things, or just say, well, actually, there's nothing to really do right now. If I do something now, it could exacerbate the situation that's already developing. And I think that having that communication and that plan in place to understand just what needs to be done and who is likely to do something or have to do something just enables you to have a little bit more peace of mind that, well, it's in hand, even if it can't be done immediately. So there's elements there. There's another thing which just kind of, moving abroad is a relatively new thing. If you think about how long humans have been around, moving abroad is probably something that, while obviously people have explored and colonized and done all that. In terms of actually going abroad for work or for kind of just generally traveling, we're probably talking less than 100 years. So you have many decades, centuries of families being around each other, being really close to each other, and being not even necessarily in the next town, to suddenly the whole world is available to us. And we still have a societal pressure of an expectation of what a family is and what a family's responsibilities are. But actually that's shifting, and it's going to take time through generations to go, well, actually, the as a caregiver, as a child, it isn't necessarily a family caregiver. That actually the communities and neighborhoods have a role to play in looking after elderly relatives. That society actually plays a role in this, because we do actually want to explore more now. We do actually see opportunities, and it isn't just confined to the walls of the town that we live in. Um, it's something that we kind of overlook, the role that just the evolution of people, and kind of brings me on to my next kind of question, which is around communication. Communication is the most important thing in any relationship, as far as I'm concerned. You can be as honest as you want, you can be truthful, you can do the best you possibly can, but if you don't have communication, what good is it? So how would you say communication can help reduce tensions? And like, what would you suggest to people who have elderly relatives who are a little bit reticent to use technology or struggle with technology? What would you suggest?
This is, for me, communication, as you said, this is the bedrock of what I work on with clients, because without good communication, it's very hard to make progress. It's very hard to even have a plan in place from the beginning. Good communication is your early warning system. If anything is going to come up, again, sometimes crises happen, we can't predict them. But oftentimes there are slowly developing conditions, dementia, maybe a lack of proper hygiene, depression, some other issues that can develop over time. And when you stay in touch with your parents, then it's easier to detect early on. Another really important point about communication that I often share with clients is it doesn't have to be perfect. 5 minutes on the way to the tube, even if it's a bit noisy, not ideal conditions, it's better than going 2 weeks without calling. It's frequency over perfection. I also want to address that sometimes communication with parents, depending on your relationship with them, can be hard. Maybe you don't have the best relationship. Maybe you often end up in arguments. That's okay. But in my experience in working with clients, showing up over and over and over again can be helpful, even if it can be difficult. Again, absent abuse, absent really really difficult circumstances. I'm kind of speaking to the mainstream, but having that regular structured communication is really, really essential. I do advise where possible to do structured and kind of scheduled communication. I have a call with my mother every Tuesday night at 8:30, because it's after I put my son to bed, and it's mid-afternoon for her when she can take a break. She's still working. Video if possible, so you can see facial expressions. And sometimes we show up and we talk about the grandkids. Sometimes we talk about her health and my dad's health. But it's about knowing the predictability. Treat it like a business call that you have to take, right? Show up. It might be a difficult conversation, it might be a fun conversation, but the point is you have that space to hear what's going on. And if there's anything awry, that's your time to start to pick up on the clues. For technophobic parents, I think especially saying every Tuesday at 8:30, or every, Friday morning at 9 a.m., or I'm going to call you every morning on my way to the tube, or whatever every Sunday, whatever you end up doing, have that consistent time, give them the phone call. And then also if they miss it, if they start to show up, that can often be an early warning sign that something's awry.
And you talked about communication can be difficult. I mean, my own experience is that communication with my parents is tough.
Oh,
That there are emotional issues there, but it goes back to the sense of guilt. It's just a feeling. So especially when you're in a different location, like talking to someone, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're crying, even if you're sad, even if you're happy, whatever the feelings that you're experiencing, it actually gets harder the longer you leave it.
yes.
My experience is that if you don't have that regular touch in, if it's difficult in the first place, then putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, actually that anxiety becomes more and more problematic, and it makes that next conversation a bit more traumatic in advance. But most of the time, it's going to be fine. You're going to be just natter. You're going to chat, and suddenly 2 hours has gone by, and you both going, "Jesus Christ, I need to go to the loo."
Yeah.
It's something that I'm very acutely aware that communication can be tough, but how essential it is if you don't have it. And like you say, it's an early warning sign when you can kind of sense, you can pick up on things, you can kind of sense what's going on, and you won't know those things unless you talk. You can't assume that just because it's silence that everything is okay, or everything is disaster. You have to communicate to know the truth.
I absolutely agree. And if I could just spend a minute or two talking about how we can also step into the shoes of our parents. And again, every parent is different, might have everyone has different backgrounds, different experiences, but generally speaking, sociologists look at the period between 70s and 90s as a really profound period of change that's akin to toddlerhood, adolescence, right? These really, really massive changes in physical capabilities, cognitive functioning, emotional development, and older adults are still developing. And their two main developmental needs at that age, kind of around 70s, 80s, are number one, retaining independence and control. So the more you push them to do something, the more they're going to push back, just like any other human being, because they want to still retain control over their lives. And number two, it's about leaving a legacy. So when you go without speaking to them, you might be missing an opportunity to learn from them, to give them an opportunity to share their hopes and dreams, their lives, their day-to-day, anything that they're processing. That could be an opportunity for that to come out. And so it's not to add to the guilt, but it's actually an open invitation to say, even if you've had a difficult relationship with your parents, and again, setting aside the kind of most difficult circumstances, this could be an opportunity to build a relationship with your parent, as they frankly may not have a lot of time left. And this is a key period where you might get some of those conversations that they've been waiting to share with you. And especially when you're abroad, they are probably missing you. They're probably really struggling with you being away as well. I know that's certainly the case for my parents. It took a few years for my mom to finally say to me when I flew out to see her a few years ago and took her on a trip, just her and me, and she said, "You're so far away." And I had never heard her say that to me. I suspected it, but to have her say to me in this, expressing sadness, "You're my daughter and you're so far away." And I respected her so much for having the vulnerability to say that.
And I was having a conversation with the taxi driver, weirdly, and I was talking about my relationship with my parents, and he gave me one bit of advice that really, really stuck. So he was originally from North Africa. And he said his parents hated him for moving abroad. He broke the cycle. He's suddenly not local. So when he goes back, he has difficult times. And he said that someone gave him one piece of advice, and that is to talk about the past. To talk about if you're struggling for anything, find a positive memory that you have and share it with them. That obviously involves them. Don't talk about something that doesn't involve them. But share a memory that they might have forgotten, or they might really fondly remember too, and might have thought that you've forgotten. But by doing that, you can then talk about something which is common between you. You can correct it, and it actually brings joy to talk about something positive, rather than we're surrounded by misery and news and doom and gloom and doom scrolling and all of that kind of stuff. But actually add like some of our childhood memories, and I know it's not the case for everybody, but some of our childhood memories are incredible. And it's really important to actually discuss those with parents, because that's what they love at the end of the day. They want to know that they were good parents, that the children enjoyed themselves, that you have these fond memories. And similarly, they have experiences from before you were born that they might want to talk about, that actually might help them to just remember some good times themselves. So it all comes back to communicating, but knowing what to talk about, and just finding those little chinks of positivity that actually lead to communication being better. And once your communication is better, that's when you can have those difficult conversations around the plans and the awkward stuff that actually that when you start hitting 70 and 80, obviously you don't necessarily want to talk about your demise because it's actually real. When you're 40 or 50, yeah, you can talk about it freely because your belief is that it's such a long way away. I'm only halfway through my life, but uh, it is much harder to recognize your own mortality as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
So, just coming to the end, if someone was feeling like paralyzed by guilt, if they have this fear of leaving, fear of guilt, fear of neglecting their responsibilities or perceived responsibilities, what would you say to them to help them to start moving with their plan to move abroad?
Yeah, great question. As with anything, I think start small, break into manageable steps, and as you said earlier, convert your feelings, which is just a feeling and it's valid, but it's just a feeling. Take that guilt, take that anxiety, and channel it into something constructive, productive. So start with one conversation with your spouse or a friend, a trusted third party, and say, "I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling anxious." Name it, right? Don't let it sit in your head. Get it out. Um, and then I think shifting from the all or nothing, from either I stay and I'm the good child, or I leave and I'm the bad child. Because as we said, by planning ahead, you're probably way more prepared than most people. And it's about saying, I'm going to move abroad. I've made this choice and I'm going to think about ways that I can be prepared and I can help my whole family be prepared for my parents' later in life journey. Um, you can think about really practical steps like getting those big five ready, right? The powers of attorney, the will, the emergency contacts, et cetera. Before you go, you can just you can do one thing a week and say, this week I'm going to set up a shared calendar. So my sibling and I can keep track of mom or dad's doctor's appointments, or I'm going to create a shared folder and think about security and passwords, et cetera. But it could be a Google Drive folder with information like doctor's names, medications, key documents like power of attorney. You can think about building a local support network near your parent. That's a huge one. That's a really, really good step to have in place that all of us should have in place, even if you live 40 minutes away from your parents. Make sure that there's a neighbor. For example, my parents have a couple in their 50s. One is an EMT, one is a lawyer. They live across the street. They're active, they're healthy. They're our go-to people, right? Anything happens, they're there, they're young, they're in good shape, they're smart, they can help. Get that local support network in place before you leave. So think about kind of week by week or month by month before your departure, what are the things that you can do practically to get your parents set up? And you will be further ahead than the majority of people who don't even move abroad.
I know that anybody who is looking at experts or expats and thinking about moving abroad, it's an area of focus for us, obviously, is going to have to deal with some of the things that we've discussed, if not all.
Mm.
So what I just want to basically give you an opportunity to basically, if someone wanted to come and talk to you and find out how you can help and how, not just necessarily get over the guilt, but also develop the plans, get communication plans, and actually work with work with elderly relatives to get things moving. What would you suggest that they do?
Sure. Please visit me on my website, guidinggenerations.co, or email me at emily@guidinggenerations.co. I work primarily with adult children, although I can work with whole family units. I work especially with those living abroad. We create elder care plans, navigate tough decisions. We make sure that nothing gets missed, and we talk through the emotional element as well. I'm there to be a trusted supporter. I'm a strategic partner to you, and I can help you reduce the stress, reduce the guilt, and get those practical plans in place. We can't predict every crisis, but we can prevent it from turning into chaos. So that's what I'm here for. And I love working with clients, especially with expats, because again, it's something that I've lived and breathed myself. And I know how important it is to get ahead of the game and get a plan in place.